and welcome to Panorama. I'm your host today, Dan Torres, talking to the mayor of Northampton, Gina-Louise Sciarra, who is running for re-election. Mayor, congratulations on the recent endorsement of both the lieutenant governor of Massachusetts and the governor of Massachusetts. Talk to me a little bit about that. That news just happened a couple days ago.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's great to be here with you. It's nice to spend some time just with you, Dan. I'm often with you and with Bill and Buzz, and so it's fun to have a conversation just with you. Yes, I am thrilled and quite honored to be endorsed by Governor Healey and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll. Lieutenant Governor Driscoll actually came and helped out with me last weekend. We did some door knocking in Florence, which was really fun. She came to a community event I had to do some cleanup on the rail trail. If you have ever had the privilege of meeting the lieutenant governor, she's has amazing energy. She herself was a mayor. She was the mayor of Salem for 17 years. That's quite a career for a mayor. And so nobody knows better what the job of a mayor is than Kim Driscoll. And she's been such an amazing partner as lieutenant governor for that reason, because she really gets municipal government in a way that sometimes I think, the folks at the top haven't had experience in.
I was going to say, how does that come about? Like, the lieutenant governor, I'm sure, is very busy. Do you know her? Like, has she known you? Has you reached out? Is there a relationship? Like, how's that?
There is a relationship. Okay. So when I first became mayor 4 years ago in January of 2022, she was still the mayor of Salem. And, there is the Massachusetts Mayors Association, and we get together usually about once a month. And when I first became mayor, it was still, Omicron was booming. And so things were mostly still virtual. But she was such an amazing mentor as a mayor and really reached out to all of the newbie mayors, and particularly, I think, the new mayors who were women. And I remember from right off the bat, the first time that I was in a meeting with her, and just how warm she was and how she embraced all of us and made herself available for any questions that we had. So I've known her since then. And then what I think is really special is when she became lieutenant governor, I didn't feel like that connection or her availability to me and other mayors changed at all. In fact, I feel like it's sort of expanded. So she's been an amazing resource for us. I know that I can call or text her at any time. She will send me texts sometimes when she hears about something going on in Northampton, or just to kind of reach out. And she's been an amazing partner for me and for the other mayors in the Commonwealth.
And the governor, too, has reached out. And you had the lieutenant governor knocking on doors on your behalf and helping you. I'm sure her schedule's busy, but willing to spend a day, a couple hours.
She was here for a couple hours. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Well, let's go to it. You decided to run for re-election, meaning you must believe I've accomplished a lot and I think I got more to do. So lay that out to the listener here in Northampton who'll be voting on November 4th and early voting as well. What do you feel your biggest accomplishments, and what do you want to achieve in the future?
Sure. So, when I first ran 4 years ago, the reason that I did decide to run after former Mayor Narkowitz said he wasn't running again was because I looked around and realized I was the most qualified person in the city to run. That was a challenging time at that moment, right? As I said before, Omicron we were still sort of in the pandemic. Hospitalizations were sort of at the peak when I first became mayor. So this was a really challenging moment. And I was the only one who had strong municipal experience who was interested in the job. So I was a city councilor for 8 years. So I was the Ward 4 city councilor for 3 terms. And then I was an at-large councilor. And I was unanimously elected council vice president and then council president in my final term when I was at large by my colleagues on the council, and led the council during the start of the pandemic. So, I think municipal experience is really, really important for this kind of job. This is not an entry-level position. And just like, the relationships that I have with our state colleagues, it's really important to have relationships in the municipality. So I, as a counselor, I knew the department heads. I'd worked with them. I had strong relationships throughout the city. And that, I think, is really, really important because you have to hit the ground running as a mayor. And there's there's no kind of time to feel it out and learn the job. Particularly, in Northampton, our charter dictates that in your first month, by the end of January, you have to do a joint presentation to the city council and to both school committees, because we have 2 districts in Northampton.
Right.
So that is a budget projection for the full year. So within your first few weeks, you have to produce this massive presentation and have a handle on what the budget's going to look like. So that's a huge undertaking for any day, any year, but certainly as a new mayor.
Yeah.
So again, I'm running again because I believe I am by far the most qualified. Now, of course, I have 4 years under my belt as mayor. And these are also really challenging times,
In what sense?
So, when I first became mayor, as I said, the pandemic, we were sort of in this surge in the pandemic. And there are all sorts of things kind of going on in the world that were really, really hard. And actually, I have been reflecting on the fact that in my first 6 months, and so in September of 2022, I will never forget this day. I was in a meeting in Springfield, and I got a text from my office saying that someone just called, and they say they're from Governor Abbott's office in the Texas governor and they're calling and saying that by this afternoon, they're going to drop off by bus a bus load of migrants onto the steps of City Hall. So if you can remember back to that time,
Vaguely,
this was actually happening, right? The Texas governor, the Florida governor, they were busing people into New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts. There was a plane
in Martha's Vineyard.
that was of folks that were dropped off on Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah.
This was actually happening. So we get this call. Amherst got a similar call. And I just stood up in the meeting. I didn't say anything to anyone. I stood up. I walked right out the door. I got in the car and I got on the phone. And by the time I made it back to Northampton, we had a meeting scheduled that included all of our sort of relevant department heads. It included Representative Sabadosa, Senator Comerford. It had, I think, Congressman McGovern's office included. It had social service organizations included. And we pulled together a meeting in a few hours and came up with a plan so that when people arrived, we would clothe them, house them, feed them, make sure they felt welcome, make sure they felt safe, and we would take care of them. And so that didn't happen. It turned out that the call in Northampton and the call in Amherst were hoax calls, and no one arrived. But we then had a plan in case that happened. So I've been thinking about that because now, so that was September of 2022. And so, we're now in October of 2025. And the conversations that I'm having and the coalition of people that we've brought together are around what happens if federal agents arrive and try and take people off of our streets as opposed to delivering them onto our streets. And that's a radical change to have happen in this period of time. So things are definitely not easier than they were in 2022. They're a lot harder. There's also lots of fear of federal funds being cut and other issues.
Okay. Well, talk a little bit about the federal and state funding for municipalities. What challenges do you foresee happening on that front specifically, and maybe specifically for Beacon Hill?
Yeah, it's something that I'm deeply worried about. So about 25% of the state budget comes from federal funds. So if those get stripped away, obviously the impact that's going to then come down onto municipalities is going to be profound. And, I think we're all feeling sort of the tenuous nature of the financial situation in the country right now. So, there's a lot of concern about the state budget and if there are going to be cuts there or how funding is going to get constricted. And then, we are always preparing for if our federal funding that we have in the city is going to get cut.
And what percent of Northampton's budget comes from, do you roughly, you don't need to give me specific numbers, but...
Yeah, so it's not a huge amount, but for example, like in our schools, it's about $1.75 million is federal funding. So if that suddenly gets cut, that's funding for students with disabilities, students who are lower income and have higher needs. That's funding we're going to have to find a way to cover, which is one of the reasons why I believe so strongly in reserve funds, which
hopefully
we'll
we touch
about.
on. School funding is one of the topics I wanted to discuss. But yeah. Wow. Okay. So at least one. I mean, if the federal cuts are 1 point something plus the state
That's
might
just
trim.
schools.
Yeah, and that's just schools.
Yes. We have we have lots of other grants and things in Health and Human Services, other departments as well.
Is there well, we're going to continue the conversation here with the Northampton Mayor, Sciarra. Mayor, I want to talk about downtown redesign schools a little bit and touch on those and kind of hear from your perspective because you're in it. You're experiencing it on a daily basis. So I appreciate you spending time on Panorama to go over this in more detail. We're going to continue the conversation. Mayor Sciarra is running for re-election here in Northampton right after this. And welcome back to Panorama. I'm your host today, Dan Torres, talking to Northampton Mayor Sciarra. Mayor, I want to go on to school funding, since we had mentioned it earlier. And there's something I wanted to ask you about that I've heard on these airwaves here on WHMP, specifically school choice. And I'm sure you've explained this, but I haven't heard it necessarily recently. But there is a school choice funding in Northampton's budget. The amounts in that fund had about $4 million back in fiscal year 2020, and it has declined steadily post-COVID. And so I wanted to understand, okay, so just so the listener understands, this is money, and I'm sure you've explained this, is money that Northampton takes in because students are chosen into Northampton schools,
Correct.
But also parents get to choose out,
Yes.
meaning their students can go study at Amherst and Belchertown or wherever
Correct.
they want, right? And so that's what the school choice funding is.
Yeah, so every district gets to decide whether they want to participate in school choice. So Northampton Public Schools have opted into school choice. Yes.
So explain to those who think, have been saying that the funds have been running low on that. Why isn't the mayor replenishing that? How does that work? Educate me on the school choice as it's declined from $4 million down to the most recent year. It looks like there's a small deficit of $270,000. So help me understand.
So I don't replenish school choice. So school choice, as you said, comes in. So these are families that are choicing into the Northampton Public Schools. And every district who accepts school choice has to create this fund where they have their school choice funds go into. And it sort of serves as a reserve fund for the school district. And so I've heard it been said that it's no other district uses it this way. That's completely incorrect. Every district takes their school choice funds and they use them to supplement their operating budget. But the key is, like with any reserve fund or any bank account you have, right? You can't spend more than you bring in. And so for many years, it was a very planned use of these funds. So it would supplement the budget, but you would make sure that you weren't spending more from that school choice account than was coming in, and you could build up reserve. Then it started with the former mayor and school committee. It started to get overspent, so they started to spend more than they were bringing in. But there was a reserve there. But I remember Mayor Narkowitz telling me this very clearly. I remember the previous superintendents, the previous business managers were very clear that they were sort of saying, okay, this practice cannot continue. We're going to create a deficit. And they were raising the flag on it. In my very first year as mayor, in my budget message, I said very clearly, this is a huge concern, and we have to stop overspending school choice. So those funds come in, they're sort of passed in through the state, but they don't come from the mayor's office. Those are funds that come directly from those families. So
essentially, it's like a formula based on the number of students who have choiced in versus choiced out. And if more families are choosing out, that means, I guess, technically there's money that you're having to pay out to those other districts. Is that how the finances work of it?
I mean, yes, but thankfully Northampton has always had more students choice in than choice out. Okay. A bigger issue that you didn't mention is charter school funding tuition, right? So, there's no charter school within Northampton, but there are around Northampton. And that is a different funding formula and has some reimbursement, but a tiny fraction. So this year we're over $3 million is going out in charter school sending tuition and that's directly from the general fund budget. It doesn't come out of the school budget at all. And so that's part of the equation too.
So one thing I've heard you say as well, we could talk about school funding, is that over the last 4 years, you've invested over 31% in the schools, and yet the school budget, I guess, has been cut because costs are rising faster. Is that what's happening? I mean, sort of to try, how does a listener make sense of where the school budgets are? It seems like you put in 5% per year, but if costs are rising 7 or 8%, there are reductions going to be made, right? I mean, is that
right.
where? Is that where
that's
Northampton
pretty
is?
much the crux. So yes, as mayor, I've increased the Northampton's public schools by about 32%, which is a record increase. And the annual increases have been 5.1, 7.4, 9.8, and then 6.5% every year. We've tried to go back and look in records, and we can't find any consecutive increases that high in the history. So this is a record increase to the Northampton Public Schools, but as we just talked about with school choice. So school choice was being overspent. We have there was ESSER funding, which was the pandemic relief funding, federal pandemic relief funding that went directly to schools. That funding sunset a year ago. So you had this huge influx of funds that then left as well. And then there's been a huge increase in expenses that districts everywhere are experiencing particularly around special education. Yeah. But everything increases a lot. And we've had, increases in salaries. So every year you have salaries that increase with cost of living increases, but also with steps. And so those compound every year. So that, as you said, ends up being more than the percents that I talked about. Then you have to factor in the fact that the majority of the revenue that a city can raise comes from property tax.
Right.
And we live in the Commonwealth. Which restricts our taxes by 2.5%.
Well, actually, if you don't mind me asking about that, regarding school funding, I've asked many candidates across the board, and even people who've come on Panorama to say, actually, the money is in these surpluses, and because I've asked, would you support an override? And I get very cagey answers that people don't feel like an override is necessary. So I want to ask you, I saw on doing homework today for this interview that it'll very likely next year Northampton will have to vote on an override. But I guess a large percentage of that override would go to school. I don't know if you can add details to that. Help me.
Yes. So this is kind of a complicated conversation, but Northampton has had planned overrides for over a decade. Yeah. And we have something called the Fiscal Stability Plan, which was started in 2013 with an override that filled a deficit that the city had that would have resulted in big cuts to schools and to public safety. Those are the two biggest budget sections. And they passed an override. And so it filled that gap and had created the reserve, which is the Fiscal Stability Stabilization Plan. And then what the plan calls for is keeping that reserve and using it over the next few years until you get to a point where you would need another override to cover these increasing costs that happen every year that just absolutely are more than 2.5%. Prop 2.5 is designed to create this tension, to be generous, in communities.
I was just going to say, I saw that Hadley had a vote on override, and they both failed.
Yes.
And what percentage, do you know roughly what percentage, if the override were to pass, that would go to schools versus the general fund? Do the voters know that before they vote? Is that clarified?
So, there's always a lot of conversation around an override. So it's a general fund override, so it would be increasing the general fund. So at just sort of the baseline, it would be the pie of the general fund, and schools are the largest part of that pie. Okay. So the schools automatically would get the largest part of that increase. But it's really about maintaining services.
Got it.
And so, we will need an override sometime in the future. The last one passed in 2020, right, like March 2020, right before the pandemic started. Mm-hmm. The implementation was delayed for a year because of the pandemic. And so it was implemented in FY22. So we always try and stretch it as long as possible between overrides because we know that it's a real strain for people. Yep. But it is the way to maintain our services where we want to. And I have to say, in the last 4 years, I've pulled $5 million out of this fiscal stability fund directly to support the public schools. So $5 million has come from this stabilization plan and gone directly into the public schools.
And those $5 million are the free is it what we know as like free cash that the city puts in because the revenue is over the expenses?
Some of it. So
Okay.
some of it came from that override. So it
Yep.
came from the fiscal stabilization fund, which is funded by an override.
Okay.
And then we try and add to it every year with what's available in terms of surplus.
Okay. Another question, and I know we in this segment we got to go, but I wanted to get your gauge since you're on the school committee, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
At what point would the school committee have to tackle potential consolidations of schools? Amherst, I'm only bringing up the example of my town that used to have 5 elementary schools. I went to one of them. It was a walking distance. And now it's down. It will be down to 2. When a new building is constructed, they're consolidating, and we'll have 2 elementary schools. So I just want to know from you, what's the calculus on that?
So, I mean, if that's something that Northampton has to consider, you want there to be a lot of time and planning around that. Northampton has, in the past, had sort of very sudden closings of schools. We never want that to happen. This is far, far in the past. So right now, there is a strategic planning process going on with the schools, and that's one of the things that they're looking at. And just for me, it's more about what do we want our buildings to look like, right? Like what sort of learning environment do we want our students to be in and what makes sense for where we are right now?
What's the rough age as we go off for those public buildings? Is it
Oh,
is
they
it 1970s?
vary
Yeah?
they vary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The buildings are so old that they recommend that just taking it down and having to build a new one is cheaper than having to rehab it. That's why I asked.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Okay. At least that's
I
what
don't
I've
think
heard.
that's the situation we're in right
Okay.
now.
All right.
But, a lot of communities are looking at like maybe these spaces don't make sense.
Oh, okay. We're going to continue here the conversation with Gina-Louise Sciarra, running for re-election, mayor of Northampton. And welcome back to Panorama. I am talking to the Northampton Mayor, Gina-Louise Sciarra, who is running for re-election. And thank you for taking your time out of your campaign to come on Panorama.
Gladly.
It's a weekend show here, but wanted to touch on downtown redesign because I feel like a lot of people are hearing a lot of things about it. And so let's get started with this very quickly is when will it technically begin? I think it's coming up very soon. If you win re-election, you will be months away, possibly, or a year away from actually seeing that project into fruition. So tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So the as scheduled on the Massachusetts Department of Transportation Improvement Plan, it's going to go out to bid next summer.
Okay. And so once it goes out to bid, roughly 3 to 6 months is the time frame. Would people start working on that?
I really hope that we can get the first shovels in the ground in 2026.
So late 2026,
Yeah,
possibly.
so fall.
Okay. Fall.
Hopefully.
Okay. So there's been a group. I heard about POP. They're trying to help mitigate some of the disruption costs that I guess people will see. Every day I drive into work, I see construction right after the bridge coming into Northampton, but there's also a lot of work being done in Hadley too. It's just there's a lot of work happening in the streets. So what kind of disruption should people expect?
So, I think that people have this idea that it'll just be complete mayhem for 3 years, and that's absolutely not true. So the most important thing for people to know is that Main Street will be open for business the entire time that this project is happening. So it will be done in sections, but it'll also be done on one side of the street and then the other side of the street. So Main Street and the businesses will be operating, and we are working really hard to support them during that time. So you mentioned POP, which stands for Pardon Our Progress. This is this great coalition that the city and my office has with the Downtown Northampton Association and the Chamber of Commerce, and now a bunch of other people. So we've got Thorns Marketplace who's involved in it. We have this great coalition and 4 working groups that are working on all of these different components to help businesses now during construction and then after construction.
And when you say help businesses, if a local business feels like, hey, I'm going to be that first phase of that, and I'm going to experience disruption of customers, who could they contact in order to either explain to them what's happening and get support from the city?
Sure. Well, they can always reach out to my office, and we're happy to talk about, any of their concerns. So please contact the mayor's office. But there are these 4 working groups that have been working in POP. There's communications, marketing, and engagement, funding and resource allocation, construction mitigation, and then business support and economic development. So you could reach out to my office. You could reach out to Jim Nash, who's former council president and is chairing POP, and get connected with the group and talk about your concerns. We're happy to help. We've also secured grants.
That's what I was going to ask. Is there grants available for businesses?
So that's something that the POP committee is working on, but my office has secured $150,000 in grants to certainly help with marketing and make sure that the businesses feel supported during this time.
Okay. I've heard discussions about having a trial run. I've mentioned candidates, multiple of them. Is that possible to see the design, to see how it would change downtown?
Well, we have many ways for you to see the design, and there's a lot of information on the city's website. So if people are curious, they should check that out. Now, this is a very complex project. This idea that we could sort of stand up a trial run that would be at all representative of this project is really not realistic. But the most important thing is that all of the components of this project are all tested and tried and true. This is stuff that's being done elsewhere in this country and other countries. There's nothing, while this is a really exciting and important project for Northampton, there's nothing that's like truly groundbreaking that's never been done before. These are all elements that we know have worked in other communities. And one of the things that POP has done is gone and look at other projects. We've worked with a consultant as well, and who's talked to other communities that have done similar projects to try and figure out what's worked, what hasn't worked, and how we should approach certain things here.
Well, some people have expressed at least a concern of what happened in Burlington, Vermont, up there, which is a little larger than Northampton. They had a downtown redesign, and there were complaints, I guess, from business owners, or I guess how long it took, and it cost some closures. So have you studied them? Have they reached out? I don't know if you know anything about the Burlington experiment.
I think that POP has talked to Burlington, and we're trying to learn from whatever mistakes other communities have made.
Yeah.
And I don't want to diminish anyone's concerns. This change is hard and construction is hard, but my goal is to support everyone through this. And the best thing we can do for businesses is do this redesign. So just quickly, the main purpose for this project is safety. And we're getting $26 million from the state because we have such a safety problem. We're in the top 5% of accident clusters for the entire Commonwealth for our downtown. So that has to be addressed. But there are all sorts of wonderful things that we're going to be able to accomplish with this project as well, including increased accessibility for folks, making our sidewalks a lot safer, making our crosswalks safer, opening up access to some businesses that someone in a wheelchair has never had access to before. We get to replace our underground infrastructure, which is desperately in need of replacement, and some of it's from the late 1800s. And has been failing, not surprisingly.
Yeah. So actually, if a little bit on the finances of that downtown redesign project, Northampton will have to pay some amount of that $27 million. So how much is Northampton having to pay from that amount? And if costs go overrun, who is going to cover that tab, I guess, is another concern or fear people have said.
So for right now, the total cost is $29 million. So the state is covering $26 million at this moment. So we have budgeted a little bit over $3 million for that underground infrastructure. Now, if we were going to be doing that project on our own and doing the excavation and then the repaving, it would be far more than that. So this is a huge cost savings that we're able to do this during this project. I actually sit on what's called the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which handles the regional transportation improvement program. And projects that cities are having, these MassDOT projects, their costs go up, sometimes they go down, they change all the time, and we're constantly moving them around and making adjustments. So this project's already had multiple adjustments. Things only get more expensive. One of the reasons why I want to get this project started as soon as possible. But MassDOT has been picking up most of the additional costs.
Okay. You know what? I actually wanted to ask about being mayor.
Okay.
If we can just shift around that. I've heard a lot about the charter change, and I believe it happened in 2019. I feel like listening to WHMP has educated me on what's happening. So I've heard a lot of people talk about we have a strong mayor system, and many have wanted to have a stronger city council system and a weak mayor system. Can you explain to me how it works? Do you as mayor get to make decisions that the city council never decides on? Like, what are your powers versus the city council's powers, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Sure. So first, if you don't mind, I'm going to correct you. There actually was a massive charter revision in 2012.
2012.
Yes. And during that the entire city's charter was rewritten. It had, it stood for hundreds of years. And some of the main changes, particularly pertaining to the mayor and council, that happened in that revision was the mayoral term went from 2 years to 4 years, and the mayor actually used to chair the city council and set the agenda or create the agenda for the city council. So that was a massive shift and a separation of powers. So, the mayor no longer sits on the city council, is not part, I go to city council meetings. I'm not required to. I do it as a courtesy and to help answer any questions. But that separation happened in after that change in 2012. And that, by the way, that charter change had to go to the voters of Northampton and was ratified by over 80% by the voters. So over 80% agreed that these changes should happen. I would argue that it actually made for a less strong mayor in some ways because, again,
explain that.
Well, the mayor used to chair the city council and used to control their agenda and now doesn't at all.
City council president does, or is it the majority? Or
the city council president does the agenda.
Does the agenda.
And so that's just that's a really big difference. So in 2019, there was a charter review and had some changes. I don't think there was a really big mayoral change in that. The thing that I remember, I was on the council at the time, was around if there was a vacancy in the office and if there was a temporary absence of the mayor because of the mayor being incapacitated. But the major changes happened in 2012, and I would argue that it was much more of a separation of powers, and the council now has much more independent power.
Okay. Well, I want to continue the conversation with you on Panorama here, talking to candidate for mayor of Northampton, Gina-Louise Sciarra, who's running for re-election. How long have you been in the city council in Northampton politics again?
12
years?
12 years.
12 years. Wow. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for spending time. We're gonna continue the conversation. I want to know a little bit more from you about what the future of Northampton holds. If you do win re-election, there are a lot of challenges. I want to touch on housing as well, because I think that's one of the biggest concerns that we have here in Northampton and in Western Mass. I mean, I'm just going to tell you this. Greenfield is having a big conversation about this Hope Street project in downtown, which I covered here on Panorama, and I continued to do that to kind of learn more about the housing challenges that everybody seems to be experiencing in this area. And it's acute here in Northampton and East Hampton, Amherst. It's all the same.
Across the Commonwealth. Across the country, there's a housing crisis, but certainly in the Commonwealth.
And the governor has pledged over $5 billion in a housing bond. But we're going to continue the conversation on Panorama. Welcome back to Panorama. I'm your host today, Dan Torres, talking to Northampton Gina-Louise Sciarra. You are running for re-election. I don't want to end this interview without discussing housing, because it seems like it's critical and shortage is a huge issue, but also affordability of those housing and what can be done to actually reduce costs to make it more affordable, which would connect back to an earlier topic we discussed about schools. Because if you can make it more affordable, maybe more families move in, they'll have more kids going to schools, school budgets will increase, and from that sense. So tell me about the housing accomplishments you've done and what's the future for that here in Northampton.
Sure. So actually, I would say that we've been most successful at assisting subsidized affordable housing to be built in Northampton. So since I've been mayor, we've helped make happen 282 units of affordable housing. And so the city doesn't we're not developers ourselves, but we partner with developers who specialize in this kind of housing, like Valley Community Development Corporation, Community Builders, Habitat for Humanity. And we are able to assist them either sometimes in actually giving land. So we surplus land, often to Habitat. There's an example behind City Hall where we're surplusing land to Valley Community Development for very housing for folks who are very at risk or who are already houseless that will be built in the next few years. And we help them leverage other funds. So using community development block grant funds that we give or Community Preservation Act funds. So that's been really successful. What's been more of a challenge is actually market rate housing. And that's I think really about where the market is now, right? So interest rates people have been waiting for interest rates to come down. Supply chain issues, cost to build right now is incredibly expensive.
Is that tariffs? What's driving?
Tariffs is part of that too. I think it's still, pandemic related and then moving into tariffs. And there's just so much financial uncertainty that I think that really impacts the market. Okay. So what we really need, though, is housing at every level. We need to build more supply. That's something that is recognized across the Commonwealth. We need to, there's so many more units of housing that need to be built to meet the demand here in the Commonwealth. We just haven't been building enough over the years. And
over decades, yeah.
Over decades and
really,
decades, yeah.
Talk about Department of Community Care. It's something that was started under your tenure the last 4 years here in Northampton. Tell me about that. Are you looking at that, seeing where it's going to be in the future, reductions or growth in that? Tell me.
Yeah, so the the Division of Community Care is something that I'm incredibly proud of. It's part of our Health and Human Services department, and which is actually very innovative. Other communities that have started an unarmed response, which is what this is. So it's an unarmed response for people who are in crisis, but don't need a police or a fire rescue response. So someone who is having a mental health crisis, maybe someone with substance use issues, houseless issues, conflict, things like that. There's a lot of our calls to public safety, and sometimes they're not the best response for somebody who's in that kind of crisis. So since DCC has been operating, which has been 2 years that they've been out with responders, we've helped almost 1,700 unique individuals, including helping folks over about 1,000 folks with housing or shelter-related issues. So it's been really successful. And when we have lots of stories from business owners and faith leaders and folks who have just seen a real difference. And so that's work that I'm really, really proud of. And we've expanded our hours a bit. So we have some evening hours now and we have Saturday hours. And I would love to continue expanding it as much as possible. A lot of it's grant funded.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is it grant? Is it come from city?
It's a combination. Okay. And that's something that really concerns me is that, human services grants right now are being stripped left and right.
Yeah. Federal, state, across the board.
Yes, across the board. Yeah. So, but it's really remarkable work, and I'm really proud of DHHS and DCC.
Yeah. Well, I want to give you a chance to also discuss what the future will be for Northampton. What do you want to focus on? If a listener listening right now isn't sure, okay, do I want another 4 years of this? Sell the piece of what you hope to accomplish in the next 4 years.
So, I agree that we have to really focus on our primary services, right? Like that's what a city delivers. But at this moment in time, we also have to recognize that there are needs that people have that aren't being met. And we have a federal government that is actively working against those needs, right? So I want to make sure that we keep DCC strong, we keep public safety strong. There's been a huge increase in our calls to fire rescue. So we're hiring 8 additional firefighters this year, which is something that I've worked on for 2 years to make happen. So I want to make sure that we keep our public safety really strong. I want to keep working on our infrastructure. Roads and sidewalks are a huge need. There's decades and decades of deferred maintenance, and we are really trying to tackle that. I've increased funding for sidewalk repaving 5-fold and an 83% increase for road resurfacing. So I want to keep working on that and making sure that we make ground on that.
Well, I wanted to touch on how budgets get formed, because I've heard a lot about this. And does it make sense to review how much is spent on capital versus, non-capital expenditures? There's a conversation that people want to change that, or that there's large surpluses in a lot of capital accounts that could be used for other things. So I know you've had to answer that on probably quite a few forums. So, but lay it out for me here in a couple minutes.
It'll be hard to do in a couple minutes, but it's really a false choice between operating funds and capital. And we want to make sure that we don't make that false choice, because we don't want to divert one-time funds to operating and then cause a deficit, right? So how we fund capital is different than how we fund our operating expenses. Capital is largely funded by our reserves and by borrowing. and also by our enterprise funds.
Yes, I've
That's
heard about
totally different than our recurring operating funds. And, these processes overlap, but they are completely different. And so I've heard sort of this argument that other communities do them at the same time. It's often towns which have to do them at the same time because they have a town meeting that they have one town meeting in the spring. And so they have to be done at the same time. Cities often do them separately, which is what we do. And, there are really good reasons why we do that. They are very intense processes to go through, right? It takes a lot of time for departments to work on them. But we also need capital projects to be approved earlier in the year, because if they get approved in June, we can't go out to bid until they've been approved. And so in school projects in particular, those have to be done during the summer. If we're approving those projects and they can't go out to bid till the summer, then you're delaying those projects for a year, which is going to cause huge cost increases. So we try and be advantageous when we can go out to bid to then get the best cost on these projects.
Well, one thing in listening to a lot of mayors come on here on WHMP is oftentimes there's a disconnect between what the mayor is saying and what some residents are saying. How would you improve communication for the next 4 years, where you're reaching out to all of Northampton residents, even those who might disagree with you and might vote for somebody else? How do you change the mayor's office is communicating with the residents on what's actually happening?
Yeah, this is something that we think about a lot, because I feel like we try and do a lot of outreach. Obviously, we do a ton of public meetings. Not everyone can go to them. We try and make recordings available. My office actually started a newsletter this year, which goes out every 2 weeks, and we accept questions from the public and answer them. It's a Q&A with the mayor. And try and put as much information as we can into that newsletter. So I encourage people to sign up for that. You can go onto our website and sign up. For something like an override, we would do a whole series of public meetings.
In all the wards?
In all the wards, or, all these different sort of areas, and try and do that kind of outreach. I'm always trying to find different ways to engage with folks. People can always call or email my office. We answer questions all day long. People shouldn't feel like they're bothering us. That's literally what we do. So always feel free to reach out to my office. And we're exploring other ways that we can do kind of more regular meetings or communications to try and connect with folks.
Yeah. Is that going to involve social media? We got to wrap up soon, but is that more videos and, I don't know, TikTok in some way?
I'm not sure I'm going to be on TikTok anytime soon. If people want short videos, I do know other mayors that do that, and can be successful.
Yeah.
Social media, I've found, has gotten to be a less and less effective way because
the toxicity of it. Yeah.
So it's been harder to get a message out because it has kind of become very toxic. But I'm open to all ideas.
Okay. Well, there you go. We have GL Sciarra, Mayor of Northampton, running for re-election. Thanks for coming on Panorama. Good luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you.
And last day to vote is?
Well, so Election Day is November 4th,
Right.
But early voting is happening right now in City Hall. And so that's during the day. It's 8:30 to 4:30, and then there are also hours on the weekend.
Perfect. Well, thanks for coming on Panorama, and good luck. Take care.
Thank you.